Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles, great millstone, who are teaching this truth in sincerity. And shout out to the Akims out there on the four corners of the earth proclaiming this truth. Bracha the Yahweh, Bracha the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakadash, Brakatum. So, hey, more lies from DC, right? Saying that they're trying to help Syria, when in fact it's quite the opposite when you actually read the true media. But they tell you something different on CNN, PMSNBC, ABC. The United States is still putting sanctions on Syria and blocking them from getting help. Syria ain't got shit as far as help from anyone except for those that don't give a fuck about the sanctions. Turkey, Syria quake. 2 women survived for days as death toll tops 24,000. Rescuers in Turkey have pulled out 2 women alive who were trapped under the rubble of collapsed buildings for 122 hours after the region's deadliest earthquake in 2 decades. A day after, President Erdogan criticized the response of rescue and relief forces and said that they would have reacted faster to the big earthquake. The number of victims in southern Turkey and northwestern Syria neared 25,000. The number of deaths in Turkey alone rose to 20,923 Saturday, while more than 3,500 were killed in Syria. The United Nations says up to 5.3 million people in Syria may be homeless after the earthquakes. Well, isn't that convenient for the New World Order? While nearly 900,000 people are in urgent need of hot food in Turkey and Syria. As many as 5.3 million people in Syria may have been left homeless by the earthquake. Savankia Dahampa, the Syrian representative of the UN High Commission for Refugees, said on Friday, adding that is a huge number and comes to a population already suffering mass displacement. Well, you know, because, again, the West's war against Syria. Yeah. Turkey's vice president told reporters that the efforts of 31,000 rescuers throughout the affected area, 67 people were rescued from the rubble in the last 24 hours. He added that about 80,000 people are being treated in hospitals, while 1.5 million people have been made homeless by the earthquake and have been accommodated in temporary shelters. Well, if they lie like this government does, you could best believe that's a lie. Because this government over here, they certainly don't do anything for their homeless. They claim to do all this great shit for the homeless. They do just about as much for the homeless as they do to help Syria. Put it that way. And you got this going on. Syria dismisses U.S. temporary sanctions waiver for quake aid as misleading. Well, of course, and you're going to find more of that out because it's in this article here. Syria has dismissed the United States' decision to issue a 6-month sanctions exemption. That's not what they're doing, but they claim to be. For all transactions related to providing disaster relief after the powerful earthquake, terming the U.S.'s measure on misleading. Of course, they're just lying to the people. It added that U.S. coercive measures and policies have deprived Syrians of their natural wealth, which is being plundered, and created obstacles for state institutions to improve living standards, implement development projects, and achieve targeted goals. Well, and like everything else, though, you know, it gets even worse than that. And here we go. The West has no regard for people's lives. Its claims about humanitarian situation in Syria is false. And this is coming from the government area. Special advisor to the presidency of the Republic, Dr. Bothania Shabam, said the U.S. and the West have no regard for people's lives, and all their claims about the humanitarian issue in Syria is false. The situation in Syria is difficult due to the earthquake that hit the country, which claiming thousands of victims and injuring others, in addition to collapse and cracking of hundreds of buildings. Therefore, the cabinet announced the affected areas in the government rates of Aleppo, Latakia, Hama, and Idlib as afflicted areas, Shaban said in an interview with RT channel on Saturday. Shaban pointed out that what worsens the situation in the U.S. and European coercive economic measures that prevent Syria from developing its means and methods to help people trapped under the rubble, while the Americans claim that they allowed humanitarian aid to enter Syria is simply not true, as Western countries do not take any humanitarian consideration and they only look at the political situation contrary to what they claim. Yeah, that's exactly right, because that's what they claim to do with the homeless over here. All they ever do is take credit, but they don't do anything. Because I see homeless all the time when I go out there to teach. I see homeless all the time when I'm just driving to go work out. And guess what? I don't think they've received anything. I know that they ain't received anything from Uncle Sam. Or from any of these so-called places for homeless. If they did, they wouldn't be homeless now, would they? Coercive U.S. measures on Syria impedes humanitarian relief operations, ambassador says. Syrian ambassador to India, Dr. Bassem Al-Habib, has affirmed that the unilateral coercive U.S. measures imposed on Syria impeded the urgent humanitarian relief operations after the earthquake hit the country last week during a press conference held on Saturday at the Syrian embassy headquarters in New Delhi. Ambassador called for intensifying the humanitarian and international efforts to lift the Western blockade imposed on Syria and allowing the return of refugees to their homeland. Well, see, that's just it. They don't want to do anything to help Syria because this has all been political and politicized anyways. World Health Organization chief, we will provide necessary support to Syria of medical equipment and devices. You trust the World Health Organization? I mean, they did such a great job with the coronavirus hoax. They got everybody wearing masks and dumbed down. You know, and it ain't just ugly people wearing masks. You know, despite what some might believe, because they just believe all the crap that comes out of that TV. Aleppo Director General of the World Health Organization stressed that the World Health Organization will provide the necessary support to Syria, including medical equipment and devices, to deal with the basic needs for the affected by the earthquake. So, you know, that's basically what's going on there. And there's more. Hezbollah also downplays the U.S.-Syria sanctions waiver because they know that that's bullshit. And they're calling bullshit. Hezbollah downplays Washington's alleged temporary and partial waiver of its sanctions against Syria, which the U.S. has recently issued under the pretext of facilitating relief missions in the earthquake-stricken Arab country. The Lebanese resistance movement, Qassam, made the remarks in a tweet on Friday. The American administration, with its implementation of the Caesar sanctions and blockade of Syria and its people, is devoid of all humanitarian standards, the Hezbollah official has wrote. Syria has been the target of U.S. sanctions since 1979. The U.S. and its allies, mostly Israeli state, intensified their sanctions against the Arab people in 2011 after the nation found itself in the grip of rampant and huge deadly foreign-backed terrorists. Strengthening the sanctions even further, the United States approved the Caesar Act in 2019, targeting any individual and businesses that participated either directly or indirectly in the Arab country's reconstruction efforts. So, so we know that pretty much, though, the sanctions are still in effect, despite what the U.S. claims. Oh wait, there's more. Iran says the Israeli state involved in Israel drone attack arrests main elements. So, you know, there's another terrorist attack by Mossad. Iranian security forces have arrested the main perpetrators of a recent failed drone attack in the central city of Isfahan, in which Israeli mercenaries were involved. The main perpetrators of this unsuccessful attempt to sabotage the Defense Ministry Industrial Center in Isfahan on January 8 has been identified and arrested. Iran's intelligence ministry and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said in a joint statement on Friday. So far, the involvement of mercenaries of the Zionist regime in the act has been proven, the statement added. It's emphasized that the failed operation was a desperate response to the crushing blows the Israeli state has suffered inside the occupied territories. So, pretty much, though. And these terrorists come out of the same areas, Kurdistan region. Isn't that a coincidence? That's where ISIS hangs out too, you know. All funded and paid for by the Israeli state, and of course yours truly, Babylon the Great. And so, like everything else, though, you know, hey, Esau's being exposed at every front. You know, these are just the main headlines. While that might be blocked by the bullshit spy balloon drone, or, you know, more spy balloons found, you know. That's all they can talk about over here. Last year, it was just a so-called slap of Will Smith because, you know, hey, he slapped the guy because he had said that he would fuck his wife. But, you know, that's all they ever talked about for months on end, you know. And it's like, who gives a flying fuck anyways, you know. But that's just it. They've run out of lies. Can't really come up with enough fake shootings. They got to come up with the spy balloon story. U.S. covertly aiding Daesh terrorists. Well, as if you didn't know that ISIS works for America. Well, here's more reports.
Zamir Kabulov, Russia's presidential envoy to Afghanistan, says that the U.S. has been reaching out to the Taliban's opposition groups, such as Daesh, and secretly giving money to them. He describes the reasoning for this covert support as such: because they really want to avenge their shameful military political defeat in Afghanistan, and in retaliation, they do everything so that peace isn't established in this troubled land. He further linked this move to Russia's security by saying, "With the armed opposition in Afghanistan, the Anglo-Saxons are covertly sponsoring Daesh, who are aimed at undermining not only the stability of our Central Asian partners, but also the security of Russia." Allegations of the U.S. supporting Daesh in particular have been around for a decade at this point. Sometimes they even come from U.S. officials.
ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS.
Obama, the sponsor of ISIS. I guess I never heard that one.
And I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton. Co-founder, crooked Hillary Clinton.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is among the top officials that accused the United States of backing Daesh. Erdogan made the accusations in response to U.S. accusations against his government for supporting terrorist groups. He said, "Now they give support to terrorist groups including Daesh, YPG, PYD. It is very clear. We have confirmed evidence with pictures, photos, and videos."
Is this why they used the weapon, the earthquake weapon?
Of Daesh, it was found that the arming and external funding that anti-Assad rebel groups received from the U.S. found their way into the hands of Daesh. With all the accusations on America's direct involvement in the founding of Daesh, the indirect involvement that most of the world agrees resulted in the creation of the terror group is the quote-unquote power vacuum that the U.S. left in the region by fighting the many wars it fought, especially the invasion of Iraq and the support of Syrian rebel groups.
There you go.
The U.S. effectively fought a war in Afghanistan for 20 years with a budget of over $2.1 trillion to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. The Taliban has been accused of many things since their swift power grab back in August of 2021, but what they have managed to do is stabilizing the country and ridding it of power struggles. That means groups like Daesh, who still have a presence in the region, weren't able to establish bases in Afghanistan, despite still carrying out terrorist attacks for a while after Taliban's takeover, the number of which have significantly dropped over the last year. Now, with around 97% of the population of Afghanistan below poverty line, and with half of the country's billions of dollars worth of foreign assets frozen by the US, the last thing the country can afford is US shenanigans trying to prop up Takfiri terrorist groups there. Recently, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken poured salt on the wounds of Afghanistan by justifying the way the US left Afghanistan by saying if the forces had remained there, quote, it would have, I think, made much more complicated the support that we've been able to give and that others have been able to give Ukraine.
Oh yeah,
Almost
the
as if
Nazis, right.
Afghanistan was a pawn in the grand scheme of US's political agendas, an attitude that isn't too uncommon in US politics with all of their friends and foes. Instances of such attitude are numerous, from the promise of retaliation to Saudi Arabia over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and then doing nothing about it because Saudi Arabia is a strategic partner to the US, to using Taiwan as a means to get under China's skin that could lead to a conflict wherein Taiwan will turn into a pawn for US's political games.
Well, no wonder why Nancy wears that mask. Real ugly cunt. So, either way, Esau's being made bare. And we got another one here.
Washington's announced plans to ease sanctions on Syria amid mounting pressure over aid flow to the earthquake-stricken country being hampered by the restrictions. The US Treasury Department's issued a license authorizing any aid-related transactions for the next 180 days. However, significantly, it excludes Syrian officials who remain on the sanctions list, essentially.
Oh, okay, so you can only send it to the terrorists.
Then American President Barack Obama announced the US would formally recognize the Syrian opposition coalition rather than the official Assad-led government, which is in control of most of the country.
The founder of ISIS.
Well, with the first tranche of aid only now reaching opposition-held areas of Syria, Washington sought to blame the delays on the Assad government and Russia.
Reality has been, up until now at least, that
you believe anything
one country
these terrorists
primarily
tell you?
has stood in the way of that. The Russians have consistently threatened or used their veto when it comes to expanding border crossings. We're going to continue to make the case. Countries around the world are going to continue to make the case, and we certainly hope that Russia and all those who would stand in the way are hearing and seeing these just heartbreaking images.
The devastating earthquakes that hit the region on Monday have killed more than 1,200 people in government-held areas of Syria. Damascus says Western sanctions, particularly those from the US, had blocked vital aid from getting through. That was essentially echoed by the UN Secretary General, who stated that sanctions should not interfere with urgently needed relief efforts in the nation. Well, let's cross live now to Vanessa Bailey. Vanessa is an independent journalist based in Damascus. Many thanks for your time, Vanessa. Washington, as we say, has announced it's going to ease sanctions on Syria, but with a lot of caveats and only for a limited amount of time. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the details of that?
I mean, basically, this comes across as another empty gesture by the United States, probably following in the line of their politicization of humanitarian aid to Syria, both before and during and after this particular humanitarian crisis. Of course, the humanitarian crisis in Syria has been in existence since 2011, when the US started the regime change war against the government and the people here. This is such an empty, hollow gesture from them. Why? Because, as you've mentioned, they won't deal with the Syrian government. So how can aid enter the majority of Syria under Syrian government protection unless they're going to communicate with the government? One. Two, the US is occupying both the northeast by proxy and directly. It's occupying Syrian resources. It has, I think, around 2,000 military personnel on the ground in the northeast and in the southeast on the border with Jordan in Al Tanaf military base. All bases, of course, are unlawful on Syrian territory. But why, for example, if the US is genuine in its promises to help Syria, why is it not sending troops and equipment to the worst hit areas that are, of course, as you've mentioned, under the protection of the Syrian government.
Because they have the oil and they're not going to give up the oil.
They won't communicate with the Syrian government? Why are fundraising campaigns being shut down while the same platforms that are raising money for the white helmets are being allowed to go ahead and raise more than 100,000 for the Al-Qaeda affiliated white helmets? Why are bank transfers not being allowed to Syria? Why are boats not being allowed to dock at Tartus or Latakia to deliver aid? Why is Israel saying it will bomb any humanitarian convoys that come from Iran or Iraq through the Al-Bukamal crossing on the basis that they're claiming it's arms for Hezbollah? So, you know, this is sheer hypocrisy. It's nothing more than a veneer to cover up the West's inhumanity. And what about the UK sanctions, Turkey's sanctions, the Gulf state sanctions, the Arab League sanctions, and the UK sanctions? What's happening with them? They're still in place.
I think another significant aspect of this, it's something you've flagged as well. Since Monday, whenever Washington officials have been questioned about why aid is not going into Syria and getting to those people most in need, the blame has been put straight on Damascus, saying that it's their fault that the aid is not getting in. That's the story that people in the West are hearing. But as you point out, it's far from the truth.
Look, if people look at a map of Syria and the areas that are currently occupied by the US assets in Syria, which has been admitted by Jake Sullivan to Hillary Clinton and by Ambassador Jeffries to the Trump point man on Syria, Mike Pompeo, that Al-Qaeda is an asset for the US in the war against the Syrian government and allies. If you look at the map of Syria and you look at the northern border, it is totally under the control of either the armed groups affiliated to Turkey, a NATO member state, or to Al-Qaeda, the US asset in Syria. Even the BBC and even the New York Times has put out reports saying that it's very difficult to get humanitarian supplies into the northwest pocket because of the control of Al-Qaeda. And you mentioned the Russian veto over the humanitarian border crossings between Turkey and Syria. Again, this is complete hypocrisy. Why were those border crossings reduced? Because what they were being used for, and this has been reported since around 2013, they were being used to ferry terrorists, arms, weapons, and equipment for the armed groups into Syria to reinforce the armed groups in their war against, on behalf of the West, of course, against the Syrian government, army forces, and allies. So to make the claim that the Syrian government is preventing the crossing of aid into northern areas is ridiculous, because they're not under control of the Syrian government. And then to completely ignore the fact that the Syrian government has been trying to negotiate with the UN, who has been putting obstacles in the way, to actually send humanitarian aid from Damascus through Sarakeb, which is under control of the Syrian forces in southern Idlib, and into Syrian civilians in Idlib. Finally, after much negotiation, in the end, between Syrian Arab Red Crescent and various international organizations that are based in Damascus, the armed groups have permitted humanitarian aid to come in from Damascus to Idlib. So who in reality has been holding up those humanitarian supplies? It's the armed groups under the control of Turkey and the US and the UN.
Vanessa, just finally, we're seeing on screen, as you've been speaking, the destruction, what's been happening. You're there in the country itself. What has that been like? How have you seen any kind of progress made in helping those thousands of people injured in the region?
Look, I think people need to understand that the emergency relief services in the majority of Syria have been seriously affected by sanctions since the beginning of this war. The equipment they're using is outdated. Much of it is in need of repair. So people are literally digging people out from under the rubble with bare hands. There are teams coming in from countries like, well, Russia was already on the ground, but Venezuela, Armenia, Algeria, Tunisia, Lebanon, Iraq, etc., and they're doing their best.
What do they need more of, Vanessa, do you think?
Equipment. Equipment for digging and clearing, housing, food, simple necessities. But in the future, they need help with repairing and rebuilding and creating environments for the people that have been made homeless yet again. These are people that were displaced through the war by the terrorist groups who occupied their homes. They managed to come back to homes that were irreparably damaged in some cases. Terrorists had been tunneling under them during the duration of the occupation, and that had made very fragile the foundations of these buildings anyway. So these peoples have been displaced multiple times. But the main thing that people need right now is equipment. And as many people said to me here in Syria, actually they don't care about the US. They don't even care about the sanctions. They just want the US to get out of Syria and to stop occupying their resources, their oil, their wheat, their barley.
You think Esau's going to give up Syria?
And just to get out.
Okay.
That's all they need, actually.
Vanessa, thank you so much for coming on the programme, giving us a sense on the ground there from Damascus, the situation as it moves on, and hopefully better days are ahead for the country. Vanessa Beeley, independent journalist, live from the Syrian capital.
So there you have it. Just get out of Syria. But has that ever been the Babylon the Great's mission? No. They have the oil, and they're not giving up the oil. So like everything else, the full video will be on, the other links down below. I guess I still have them on there. Well, we're in the time that Esau being revealed, man, because his wickedness is exceedingly great. And he shall not be able to hide himself, as it goes into here in Jeremiah chapter 49. And like everything else, though, the Most High is visiting these places, because again, we know that whether a weapon was used against Syria and Turkey, because of course Turkey is not playing along with Babylon, because now, they have deemed the terrorists that Babylon control to terrorists that, and they're pointing the finger. Hey, they're saying that straight up the gate, that the U.S. is controlling the terror groups right out of the Kurdistan region. So that makes Turkey an enemy of the United States, and indeed, the United States does have weapons like that to do things. So but like everything else, though, Esau is controlled by the Most High, anyways. And he's visiting a lot of people. The reason why is because, again, these people went and sold us. They sold us. They sold the girl for wine, right? And they all took part in it. You read in Psalms 83. So that's why the Most High is visiting them. But he's saving Babylon for last. But we're in the time now that he's making Esau bare. Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 8. Flee, turn back, dwell day, O inhabitants of Dedan. For I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I will visit him. So like everything else, though, his visits are going to be a lot bigger. Ultimately, this visitation is going to be by nuclear destruction. If great gatherers come to thee, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If these by night, they will destroy till they have enough. But I made Esau bare, I've uncovered his secret places. See, that's just it. Esau's getting exposed on everything, His lies are being exposed, and, and he should not be able to hide himself. They claim one thing, but everybody sees what he's really doing. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, his neighbor, is not. Leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve them alive, and let thy widows trust in me. For thus saith the Most High, behold, those whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunken. That's talking about the Israelites. We were never supposed to drink of that cup, but we have assuredly drunken. And thou art he, shall altogether go unpunished. Thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink of it. So we're getting into the time that Esau's going to have to drink of this cup of wrath of indignation, which is the nuclear destruction. And it's coming. So hopefully this has all been edifying, and it's on to the next one. Shalom.